our opening examination of Jesus and his work amongst the people of Israel, specifically through these institutions that are a fundamental part of life as the people of Israel. So just a reminder, the first institution that Jesus interacts with is the wedding, with his first miracle in the Gospel of John. The second institution that Jesus works with is the temple, in driving out the money changers. The third one is the interaction with Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee and teacher, and reorienting what it is to be truly born, especially being born from above / born again. And finally, the last part for these institutions, in a sense, are the patriarchs. So we have Jacob's well, which is on the land that was given to Joseph. And as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, the significance of that is both the way in which throughout the history of the people of Israel, there has been this sense of otherness. That is to say, Joseph, by virtue of him being in Egypt, marrying an Egyptian wife, going through the Egyptian burial rite, was, for all intents and purposes, an Egyptian, and is not counted amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. But his hope in death was not that of the Egyptians. It was that of the promises made to his fathers of old, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is why he still had land given to him in the midst of the 12 tribes, and why his bones were brought up out of Egypt during the Exodus. And so for the Samaritan woman and the Samaritans in general, they had their connection to the patriarchs of old through that well. But they also had this sense of outsiderness, if you will, by virtue of the land. It was Joseph that was in and around there. And yet, to be inside or outside of God's people is not a matter of being born of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, etc. by purely physical means, but rather it is the spiritual confession of faith, that is, drinking of the living water that Jesus provides. And that is what we are in the middle of as we are making our way through John chapter 4. So with that in mind, we continue here then in verse 16 of John chapter 4. Actually, we'll start with 15 and work our way into it. So John 4:15. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." So, we see several interesting things that are happening here. First, we see the omniscience of Jesus. We're right in saying you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands. The one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. What are we missing in the first century that we have in the 21st century that would make this knowledge impossible to obtain in an otherwise miraculous fashion? There's no internet. There's no social media in the first century. You can find a lot about somebody on Google that's publicly available, including prior addresses and different people that may be connected to you. It's actually very unsettling at times. There is nothing like that, obviously, in first century Israel. There was no Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or anything like that where people who may not even be aware that they're oversharing about their life can have somebody track down what's going on. So for us, the only way that Jesus can know this about this woman is through his divine omniscience. So one of the things that we want to pick up here is the fact that Jesus is God, and one of the ways that we know he is God is by the way in which he knows this woman, even if they have otherwise seemingly never met before. And this is where her reaction then in verse 19 kind of gives us what we need to know about who Jesus is. That is to say, it's not a perfect reaction, but there is an acknowledgement by her that he is just more than another random person at the well. She said, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." So she's making this journey towards recognition of Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God, but she's not there yet, right? And this is where the continued interactions between this woman and the Messiah has some tremendous importance for us. One of the things that separates those who receive Christ in faith versus those who outright reject him is the reaction to the acknowledgement, even at minimum, that he is a prophet. So this woman perceives that he is a prophet and continues conversation in good faith and trusting in Christ. However, when the Pharisees perceive that Jesus is a prophet, or at least is saying something that a prophet, if not God himself, would say, what is their reaction? They react in anger. They react in trying to have Jesus be stoned, etc. But for us, as we see this interaction, we see the growing recognition in this life of faith that Jesus is who he says he is, who John says who he is in chapter 1, which is the Word who became flesh and dwelt among us. Any questions or comments?
Pastor, there's a lot of faiths that see Jesus as a prophet, but not as Lord. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the Islamic faith, for instance, sees Jesus as a prophet. So, it's
Yeah.
a saving faith.
Yes, that is something that even in the Gospels is a problem. So it's not just in John 4 here that we see this connection to Jesus and the prophets. We see this all over the place in a variety of different spots, even amongst those who are actually even sympathetic to who Jesus is. But this is where, beginning in verse 19, we're going to see this reorientation. And if you wanted to talk about, in a sense, what John 2 through 4, in this opening part of the Gospel of John is helping us with, it is reorienting. In this case, again, we have these four major institutions in John 2 through 4 that are being reoriented into what true life, true hope, true faith looks like in the person of Jesus. And as we will continue on in 5 through 10, we're going to see these four feasts that Jesus interacts with. But as we continue on in verse 20, we again see the connection to the saints of old, but we also see the way in which the saints of old look forward to the right thing, and sometimes the people of God do not join in that. So verse 20, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. Now, there's a lot of history that is baked into that very simple verse. So just a bit of a reminder of your biblical history of the people of Israel. And if you don't remember it, that's okay. I thought about giving a pop quiz on the detailed breaking apart of Israel, starting after Solomon's death with his sons Jeroboam and Rehoboam. But just a reminder, after the death of Solomon, the kingdom split into two. And essentially 10 of the 12 tribes were the northern kingdom of Israel. And in the northern kingdom, they were actually more economically prosperous. They were the ones that were more worldly in a lot of ways. And there was a lot of resentment with the southern kingdom because guess where the temple was? The one place where you could offer sacrifices for the forgiveness of sins. Join in the Day of Atonement. The Holy of Holies was located in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. It was the heart of the tribe of Judah. And so after a while, due to the split in a variety of ways, the northern kingdom had little, if nothing at all, to do with the southern kingdom. And they established places in the north where they could offer sacrifices, where they could continue on in the life of faith. However, both north and south took these high places and then made them places of idol worship. And so when she says that our fathers worshipped on this mountain, it's not just worshipped in a bad way, that is to say, false worship, but there was true worship, worship that was done in faith. And so Jesus does two things to again reorient the whole history of Israel back to what it was supposed to be in the beginning, which is God has set apart the people of Israel for one purpose, so that the Messiah may come out of Israel and bring salvation and life both for Israel but also for the world. And so Jesus says that. When he says that salvation is from the Jews, we see that it comes out of Israel. The Messiah comes out of Israel. And it's interesting. I think we talked a little bit about this concept last time. But really, when Jesus is talking in 4:22 here about salvation being from the Jews, he's, again, not talking about being physically descended from Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or being a part of a specific tribe, but rather it's the faith that was credited to Abraham as righteousness. And in the Old Testament, especially in the prophets, we see this concept of Israel reduced to one. And let me write this down here. So for us, when we see that, for example, in Isaiah, Amos, etc., we see this juxtaposition of Israel in the historical sense versus Israel in the faithful sense. So what does this distinction look like? Well, it looks like the servant songs in the book of Isaiah as an example. There are 5 servant songs. The most recent one that we can point to is what we heard on Good Friday. Behold, my servant shall act wisely, he shall be high and lifted up. By his stripes you will be healed. That servant song only applies to one person only, and that is God's Messiah. You do have mention of other servants in the book of Isaiah, and in fact, whenever Israel is mentioned as a servant, it is in the context of their faithlessness, not their faithfulness. In fact, one of the key themes of Isaiah, Amos, etc., is that there is only one who can be perfectly faithful, and that is the Messiah, the Christ. And in that sense, through the work of the Messiah, all the faithful work given to Israel is perfectly fulfilled and completed. In the Messiah, Israel is reduced to one. But not just reduced to one because salvation is only for one person, but rather through that one person, salvation will go out into the world. And so when Jesus is saying in verse 22, salvation is from the Jews, he's not just saying, again, salvation is from the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Salvation is from the faithfulness to the promises that God made all the way back in Genesis chapter 3 about crushing the head of the serpent, about bringing Israel in the world from death into life. And so in this case, Jesus is actually really saying in 22, salvation is not just from the Jews as an ethnic people or a location in the map, but rather salvation is from the faithful work of Israel, which is Christ himself, and his work and his promises. And this is why then in verse 23, he expands what worship and what faithful life looks like outside of the physical confines of Jerusalem, the temple, and even Israel itself. When he says, the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Verse 25 lets us know that she gets that. And that the idea of not just Israel reduced to one, but now the one is in the midst of the people of Israel, is her response in verse 25. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And then Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. One of the, yes?
Can you use a darker color for us blind people? Oh, thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
that's okay.
Everyone needs to go like this.
Well, that's true. Well, sometimes not sometimes, all the times, my markers disappear, and you know who the chief culprit of that is.
He's about that.
He's about 2.5. He looks like my wife, but he acts like his father. That is Atlas. So I'll use this from now on. So actually, I'll just go ahead and rewrite this up here. I don't know what happened. There we go. But as we see in the Gospel of John, there are 14 total times where we see Jesus directly ascribe to himself, I am. So we have these sevenfold declaration, the sevenfold I am statements. So we have 7 that are declarations. And we have 7 I am theological teachings, one of which we will actually hear this morning. And this is really important to pay attention to in the Gospel of John. Because for us, John is all about seeing Jesus as God in the flesh, as Emmanuel, God with us. And so, just a bit of a reminder of why the I am statements are important. In Greek, the only way in which we see the name of God utilized in the Old Testament when it comes to the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament produced in the 4th century BC, is in Genesis 3. In fact, why don't we just turn there to remind ourselves, refresh ourselves on everything. So we'll go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 3, I apologize. In Exodus 3, we have the distinct and unique name of God that is given to Moses to communicate to Israel and the world exactly who he is. And in some ways, it also communicates what he has done. So Exodus 3, starting in verse 13. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, the Lord, or I am, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Now we've talked about this before, but just a bit of a reminder. So first off, in this is what it looks like. And remember, Hebrew is read from right to left. Sometimes you'll see it transliterated in English in one of two ways. The first way is just what we call the tetragrammaton. It's the 4 initials capitalized. Or sometimes you might see it spelled out like this. But that is I am. And so in Greek, there is a unique way to what they did to produce I am in Hebrew as they translated Hebrew into Greek for the Septuagint, for the Old Testament. And I'll just do the English transliteration here. This is the word ego, eimi. So these are 2 different words in Greek. Both have I am or I exist, but they never occur together in biblical literature outside of the name of God. In Greek, in both Old Testament and New Testament. And I don't know about classical Greek, but it's very rare, if ever at all, we see that same formulation. So we have a 2-fold I am in the Greek translation. And again, this is important because there are 7 total times when Jesus just declares, in the same fashion that God does in Exodus chapter 3, I am who I am. And so John 4:26 is the first one of these 7 I am declarations.
How many of those declarations are in the Gospel of John?
No, this is only in the Gospel of John. We're just focusing on the Gospel of John right now. So again, there's 7-fold I am declarations, and then there are also 7 other I am theological statements. So the one that we're hearing this morning is from John chapter 14, which is our Gospel reading. And that's 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That also has the same ego, eimi, formulation that Jesus includes. That again is a unique claim to divinity because he is ascribing the name of God, which also talks about his action to himself. Because the other thing that we have talked about before, but just as a bit of a reminder, the name Yahweh, I am who I am, also shares the similar verb root that we see in Genesis 1, which is the Hebrew word for to be. So the word let there be is yahreh. So let there be light. Let there be sun, moon, and stars. Let there be creeping things that creep along the face of the earth. So the idea of essentially God as I am who I am, and out of his I amness comes the rest of the world in his creative word and work, again testifies to not only who God is, but what he has done. Namely, he creates out of nothing. And Jesus, by saying that he is the I am, like he does here in verse 26, is claiming to be God. Yes?
In the first chapter of John, it speaks of Jesus, the Word, being the Word in the creation of everything. He is that attribute of God that brings everything that we see into existence.
Yeah, and in fact, with that, just to refresh ourselves on the high Christology and divinity of Christ that we will see be testified to, let's turn now to Colossians chapter 1. This is a great time to again see the connection between God, Jesus as God, the great I am, the one through whom all things exist. So Colossians chapter 1. So remember, God enjoys Pepsi Cola, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. So Colossians 1, could I get a volunteer to read 15 through 20 of Colossians 1? All right, thank you, Jeffrey.
He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by him, in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile everything to himself, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross.
Thank you. So just a couple of quick notes. We talked about it before, but it's always a great time for a reminder of this. First one is when we hear firstborn, both of creation in 15, but also in 18, firstborn from the dead. There are actually two words in Greek that are translated as firstborn. The first one is firstborn as in physical descendant. So of the Swan family, I am the firstborn. I have two younger brothers. But then we also have a second word that can also be translated as firstborn. And to give a bit of an example, last week we talked about the story of Joseph as we built up the background behind why it was important that this woman was at Jacob's well, which was on the land that was given to Joseph coming out of the Exodus. But in the story of Joseph, Reuben is the oldest. He is the firstborn of his father. But Judah, by the time we get to the end of Genesis, has the priority amongst his brothers. He is the one who speaks before Joseph, before they realize that he's Joseph. He is the one who's in charge of administering the affairs of his family. So in a sense, he is the firstborn, equal to power and responsibility of his father. That's why he speaks for his brothers. So the second word is what we see here in Colossians 1:15 as well as in verse 18. So Jesus is firstborn, that is to say, is of the fullness of power and authority as of the Father, just as Jesus has the full power and authority over death itself. And this is important for us to note and to remember, because all this hymn is trying to tell us is that what God is, Jesus is also. So there are only two things that God can do that humanity cannot do. The first one is forgive sins solely based off of who you are. We cannot do it. We cannot forgive sins because we are perfectly righteous and just. Only God can do so. The second thing is none of us can create out of nothing. That is to say, speak and have it be so. And yet, as we see in verse 17 here, or 16 and 17, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. What Paul is doing here is having Jesus be equal to and have the same work as the Father, which means that he is and the Father are one, as Jesus will say in the Gospel of John. So for Colossians chapter 1, it is all about showing us how and why Jesus is the ego eimi, Yahweh, I am. It is all about showing us exactly why Jesus is who he says he is in the Gospel of John when he says to you, I who am speaking, I am. And that's a great comfort and blessing for us because Jesus, as we heard in John chapter 3, did not come to what? Condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. And so this is why we rejoice in the Word becoming flesh. This is why we rejoice in Christ holding all things together, because he holds us, our sinful selves, together and moves us again from death into life. Any questions or comments on this? Yes?
This last week I've been going through the book of Concord, the Reader's Edition,
Mm-hmm.
over the two natures of Christ.
Yeah.
And it is just so eye-opening. I know that, God and Jesus
Mm-hmm.
are the same, but different, distinct.
Yeah.
But it just the way it really spells everything out. I can't. It's just amazing.
It is.
God is in Christ, Christ is in God. And what struck me so much is that when Christ died on the cross, God died as well. And when I first heard that, it was like, God died? Well, look who God, that whole chapter is just really amazing.
Yes, yeah, and the Gospel of John is basically the story behind why we get to that chapter as we do when we talk about Christ as fully God and fully man. And this is where sort of the connective tissue for all of that are these Jesus' usage of ego eimi, I am. And why when we hear those statements and see that in the text, we immediately need to pay attention and see what has come before, what comes after, and how the case is being built for Jesus as God. Yes? Yeah?
Didn't the two sons of Joseph get their allotment of land instead of Joseph? Because,
Yeah.
so when you say it was given to Joseph, wasn't it given to his?
Well, no, Joseph still had his own little patch and plot, if you will. But it was sort of within the 12 tribes, but not a part of the 12 tribes. And his bones were taken up out of Egypt and into the promised land in the Exodus. Yeah.
Well, I always go back to Revelation 4 because, it says Jesus says those that are worshiping are going to worship in spirit and truth. And here, the 4 and 20 elders are standing in the throne of God. It says, "Your Lord, our Lord, in God we see glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created, and have their being." And it isn't interesting that when we do our liturgy, we say created heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Part of our worship.
Exactly. And there's just a lot of radical things that are happening here. Again, not the least of which that Jesus is talking to this Samaritan woman. And so, even though we've been talking theologically about why this is such a significant passage, let's not ignore the fact that this is just a tremendous thing just on a purely practical level in first century Israel. How do we know this? Well, let's look at 27 through 30 of John chapter 4. Because again, there is tremendous friction between Israel and Samaria, between the remnants of the northern kingdom and the people of Israel that is continuing to this day. In fact, I think we mentioned it last week, but in a lot of ways, it's almost better to be a Gentile than to be a Samaritan if you're interacting with somebody from Israel, because of how deep those hurts run. And this is where then verse 27 just makes a lot of sense. Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" And they went out of town and were coming to him. So this woman does something